They look happy, don't they? The narcissist has moved on, a new smile, a new photo, a new beginning. It seems like this time they've finally found peace, as if they've discovered real love. But look closer, and beneath the glow of that so-called new chapter lies nothing more than the same old script dressed in new clothes. A narcissist doesn't start a new love story, they resurrect an old wound. Every new supply isn't someone they love, but a mirror. They need a tool that allows them to reenact their familiar ritual, idealize, control, devalue, then discard. It's a cycle disguised as destiny, a performance mistaken for passion. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate." That is exactly what's happening here. They call repetition, fate, addiction, connection, illusion, love, presence. They're not building something new. They are running from the emptiness inside, from the collapse of a self that was never truly formed. But in the end, this story isn't about them, it's about you. You, the one who has learned to see the pattern. You who understands that a new supply is not a replacement, but simply a reflection of who you once were in a chapter you've already outgrown. When you realize that, something deep within shifts. Comparison fades, resentment dissolves, and your silence becomes freedom. Because freedom doesn't come from being chosen again, it comes from recognizing the loop and stepping off the stage. There is no revenge greater than evolution, no ending more profound than awakening. What they call moving on is merely the next episode of the same story, except this time you are no longer a character in it. You are the one who has graduated. And when the illusion can no longer seduce you, you finally see the new supply is not a new love story at all, but a replay of the same old tragedy performed by someone who has yet to awaken. The moment you see them hand in hand with someone else, your heart feels like it's being crushed. That image isn't just a cut, it's an earthquake to your dignity. Because you once believed that if they could replace you so quickly, then perhaps you were never good enough. But that is the cruelest illusion the narcissistic game creates, the illusion of being replaced. In reality, they didn't replace you. They simply changed scenes. When the old mirror no longer reflects what they want to see, they look for another one. The new person isn't better than you. They're just taking over the role you once played. Same script, same lines, same emotional choreography, only on a new stage, with a new audience who hasn't yet realized it's all a rerun. No one is born a narcissist. They become one when the world reflects a single message back at them. Your value only exists when others acknowledge it. And from that point on, they live through the gaze of others, like an addict surviving on the one drug that helps them temporarily forget the emptiness inside. But what they're addicted to isn't love, it's the feeling of being reflected. Reflection is how they survive. They don't see you as a human being with depth, but as a living mirror where they can view an idealized version of themselves. In the beginning, when you reflect back that they are charming, intelligent, or desirable, they become intoxicated. But that isn't real joy, it's the ego's temporary revival. They aren't connecting with you. They're enamored with the image of themselves they see in your eyes. If real love is a two-way current, a relationship with a narcissist flows only one way, inward. They absorb your emotional energy like a vampire, drinking blood not out of malice, but because they don't know how to generate inner energy of their own. They cannot sustain themselves with self-awareness or compassion, because inside them is a barren landscape, a place untouched by the light of conscious selfhood. So they need you to feel like they exist. You become the emotional power station for a soul running on empty. But what they can't understand is that the energy they seek lies within themselves, not in others. When they steal energy from the outside, the fullness lasts only a moment before dissolving into deeper hunger. They are addicted to the sense of power they feel when you react, because every reaction tells them they matter, that they have influence, that they are real. But like every addiction, the first high is always the strongest. After that, nothing is enough. They must escalate, hurt you deeper, create more drama, and so they fall into a relentless cycle of loving and betraying. After a relationship ends, normal people stop, hurt, cry, and ask, "What have I learned from this?" They look in the mirror, confront their part, and grow. But for the narcissist, that quiet moment is a nightmare. They cannot sit in a room without applause, without messages, without admiring eyes, because that silence is not just empty. It is full of echoes of themselves. When no one reflects the image they want to believe is real, they feel like they're disintegrating. Every second in loneliness becomes a reminder that there is nothing inside them to hold on to. They never developed an inner life. All their value has always come from outside praise, attention, roles, power, or a partner. Without those, they don't just feel lost, they feel invisible. And to a narcissistic ego, invisibility is the same as non-existence. So instead of learning to heal, they escape the silence by diving into a new relationship. The new person's not someone they love, they are a crutch for a collapsing ego. They need someone to look at them like they're the center of the universe, so they can temporarily forget that inside them is an empty abyss. They rush into love, rush into commitment, rush into declarations, not because they feel connection, but because they're terrified of feeling nothing. From a psychological perspective, this is an avoidance mechanism, avoiding pain by replacing the source of stimulation. When you withdraw, they need someone new to continue sustaining the dopamine flow, that sense of being alive, desired. They are addicted to the initial high of love, not because of love itself, but because of the feeling of control and power it gives them. A narcissist doesn't truly move on. They simply circle the same wound in a different form. To outsiders, it looks like progress. A new person, a new story, a new smile. But look closely, and you'll see it's not a beginning, it's a rebirth of the same illusion. Every new supply is not a soulmate, but a replacement actor in a play they've never dared to end. Narcissists repeat their mistakes because they cannot face the darkness within themselves. They fear the truth so much that they create illusions to avoid seeing it. Whenever they hurt, instead of learning, they flee. Whenever they're exposed, instead of realizing, they project. They turn everyone into a villain, every relationship into a punishment stage, all to keep the old ego story intact. I am perfect. I was betrayed. I am the victim. And as long as that story remains unbroken, they must reenact it with someone new, because their soul has not yet been permitted to evolve. In Jungian psychology, this is called repetition compulsion, the unconscious urge to recreate the same tragedy, hoping unconsciously that this time the ending will be different. But without awareness, the result is always the same. Narcissists repeat the cycle not because they want to hurt others, but because they're addicted to familiarity, even if it's painful. At least it makes them feel real. What they seek is not love, but psychological oxygen. Their entire ego exists only when it is seen, admired, reflected. Without that reflection, they collapse into their inner void, like a star imploding under the weight of its own emptiness. That's why they always move fast, because silence feels like death to them. Narcissists are addicted to the feeling of beginning again. Each new face is just a temporary mirror they use to cover shame, rejection, and the loss of power when the previous person walks away. But the wound remains untouched, unexamined, unhealed. They are not loving, they are reflecting. They do not see the real person in front of them. They only see the image of themselves they desperately want to believe in. Jung called this ego inflation, the false self puffed up by the energy of others, fragile like a soap bubble, existing only through the breath of admiration. And every new supply is that breath. The early days are always radiant, laughter, connection, deep conversations that feel like destiny. But that destiny doesn't come from the universe. It comes from an unconscious that has not yet awakened. They don't repeat because they're evil. They repeat because they're blind. They don't know who they are without an audience. Every compliment is a heartbeat. Every gaze is a mirror. Every moment of attention is a thread stitching together a torn ego. But eventually, what once felt intoxicating begins to feel exhausting, because no one can hold the mirror forever. The new person will eventually feel what you once felt, the drain of having to maintain an image that is never enough, of being the energy source for a bottomless soul. And when the light in their eyes begins to dim, the narcissist will feel empty again, and the cycle will begin anew, as if no lesson had ever been learned. The better they perform, the further they drift from themselves. The more admired they are, the more terrified they become. Because every compliment is a double-edged sword, it feeds the mask, but also convinces them that only the mask is lovable, and the true self underneath is not. And so they become addicted to being seen, yet afraid of being truly seen. A paradoxical existence, desperately craving love, yet terrified of real love, because real love would illuminate the parts they've tried so hard to bury. Seen from the soul's perspective, they are trapped in a kind of collective self-hypnosis ritual, a play repeated across lifetimes, where the ego tries to save itself with illusion. They cast themselves as a god, creating a perfect version of who they are, but the more they try to be God, the further they drift from the true divine, the original soul within them. Jung once warned, "Those who look for the light without facing their own darkness will never find what they seek. They will only project their own inner darkness onto the world." And that is precisely the tragedy of the narcissist. The light they shine doesn't come from the soul, but from the stage lights, where nothing exists unless there is an audience. The new person in their life thinks they are being loved, but in reality they are simply taking the lead role in a play with a pre-written script. One day, they will also begin to recognize the familiar lines, the identical expressions, the fated coincidences, repeated exactly as you once experienced. And when this new person starts to awaken, the actor panics, because when the audience's eyes turn away, they don't just lose a person, they lose their reality. This is the loop of the narcissist. Create a role, be worshipped, become afraid, destroy, then start over. Not because they want to hurt anyone, but because they cannot bear the truth that they have no real self to offer. And every new supply is just another stage set up so they can temporarily forget the moment the curtain falls, when there is no applause, only the hollow echo of their own soul. However, every illusion has a lifespan. No matter how heavily it is painted with promises, no matter how many layers of new love glow are applied on top, there comes a time when that veneer begins to peel. For the narcissist, this is the moment the loop starts to collapse, not because they choose it, but because there is nothing left on the outside to prop up the emptiness inside. As the reflection from others weakens, they are confronted with what they have avoided their entire life, the naked truth of who they really are. At this point, the expressions they have so carefully rehearsed no longer match reality. They still say the same lines, still try to maintain the image of being happy, winning, doing great, but the light has gone out in their eyes. The new person starts to feel that something is off, a tightness in the energy, a tension between words and emotions. The mask is still there, but cracks have appeared. And like any structure built on illusion, a single crack is enough to bring the whole castle down. This is when the narcissist enters the phase of mask fatigue. The constant effort to maintain the image of, "I'm fine, I'm victorious, I'm happy," becomes a burden. Every smile is an inner spasm. Every social media post is a cry for help written in images. They start to feel lost inside their own role, like an aging actor who no longer remembers why they chose this career in the first place. From the outside, they may still appear to shine, but inside, that light has changed color. It is the light of a lamp about to run out of oil, because their energy doesn't come from an inner source, but from other people's attention. When that attention fades, or worse, disappears, they begin to contract in on themselves, an ego shrinking, as if being erased from existence. This is a panic few ever see, because it unfolds in silence. With no one left to blame, no one left to manipulate, they are trapped in the stillness of their own presence, the very thing they have tried every possible way to avoid. Jung once said, "There is no awakening without a descent into your own personal hell." But instead of going through that hell, The narcissist always looks for a way around it, and that is exactly why they remain stuck in it. When there is no one left to react, they fall into what is known as ego collapse, the point at which the inflated self no longer has the energy to hold its shape. They no longer know who they are, no longer distinguish between real feelings and performance, and in that moment, their greatest fear rises, the fear of no longer existing. This is the stage where most of them try to run away from themselves again. They may look for a new supply, or reconnect with old ones, just to feel real again. But the difference now is this. This time, no one fully believes them anymore. That artificial glow has dimmed. Every new person they meet exhausts them faster. Every new cycle ends sooner than the last. They begin to realize that the old magic no longer works, because illusion can only function as long as the audience still believes. The collapse of the loop doesn't happen overnight. It is a slow process in which everything they once relied on gradually loses its effectiveness. Other people's admiration is no longer enough. Attention doesn't excite them like before. Their old manipulation tactics, rage, silence, pity, begin to lose their grip, because no one responds according to their script anymore. What they used to call charisma has now become an energetic crack. Instead of drawing people in, it makes them pull away. And then, in the quietest moment, when no one is left to reflect them, the shattered mirror appears. They look around and see no one is there. No one listening, no one reacting, no one willing to play soulmate anymore. Only the silence they once despised remains now their only companion. In that silence, something terrifying happens. They start to hear themselves. The hollow echo they spent so long trying to drown out now roars through their mind. It doesn't speak in words, but in feeling. A sense of meaninglessness, falseness, and disconnection from life itself. For a few, this moment can become a rare doorway to awakening. If they are brave enough to endure it, to not run away, then silence can become a true mirror, one that does not reflect a face but a soul. But most cannot. They rush back toward outer light again like a moth to a flame. What they need is not love, but sound, any sound that can confirm they still exist. Yet the more they try to recreate the loop, the more exhausted they become. Each new beginning costs them another piece of their soul, because every counterfeit relationship cuts away another fragment of the soul to feed the illusion. And when no one is left to reflect them, all that remains is a fragmented self, a soul that no longer knows what is real and what is fake. Jung once wrote, "The price of not becoming conscious is having to live someone else's life." The narcissist is exactly this, a person who has lived their entire life through the eyes of others, and when those eyes disappear, they have nothing left to cling to. When a soul has truly learned its lesson, the universe no longer sends the same test. But before reaching that state, there is always a final exam, a test so subtle it looks like a second chance, but is actually a temptation to step back into the loop. For the empath, this test often appears in a familiar form. A message, a glance, an apology, "I've changed." And if you are not fully awake yet, your heart will tremble, not because you still love them, but because the unconscious part of you still doesn't fully believe you deserve peaceful love. The narcissist knows this. They can smell the crack in your energy, the place where hope still lingers, and they will come back exactly when you are weakest, saying exactly what you once dreamed of hearing. Not because they truly want to start over, but because they want to be sure they still have emotional power over you. But this is precisely your soul's final lesson. Will you choose to relive the old emotion or choose the new version of yourself? True awakening doesn't come from avoiding pain, but from looking directly at it without judgment, without excuses, without trying to fix anyone. Simply witnessing. When you can look at the person who once broke you and remain calm inside with neither hatred nor pity, that is when the emotional samsara ends. You are no longer a player in that drama. You are the observer who has finished the lesson. On a deeper level, this lesson is not just about love. It is about how you relate to yourself. The empath once believed their worth lay in bringing light to others. But when they finally stop, they realize that true light doesn't need to be acknowledged. It only needs to be sustained. You don't need anyone to see you in order to shine. Your quiet presence, non-reactive, not performing, not trying, is the highest expression of inner strength. Carl Jung once said, "What we resist will continue to exist. Only when we accept it will it dissolve." That's why the cycle only ends when you no longer want to win or lose, no longer try to fix anyone, no longer hunger for justice or an apology. When you accept that they are the way they are, that you went through this experience in order to truly see yourself, the energy of resistance dissolves. And when resistance dissolves, the darkness loses its power too. Many people think that stopping means giving up, but in reality it is a restructuring of consciousness. Stopping is not quitting, it is transformation. You no longer react from unconscious emotion, you begin to act from sovereign awareness. You understand that everything they do, from love to betrayal, says nothing about your worth, but only reflects their level of awakening. And once you understand that, you step out of emotional collusion, step out of the victim role, and step out of the savior instinct. The most beautiful part of this journey is when you realize your silence not only saves you, it also becomes a seed of awakening in the other person. Because one day, when all their mirrors are shattered, they will have to look at themselves, and in that moment, your energy, your calm, will be the awakening memory they carry. Not through words, but through energy. Not through arguments, but through a presence that transcends the duality of winning and losing. In reality, many empaths once believed they had lost everything. But when they finished the lesson, they realized they lost nothing. They simply returned to themselves. They lost illusions, lost the role of savior, lost blind faith, but in exchange, they gained the one thing no one can ever take away: consciousness. And once a soul is conscious, no one can ever manipulate it again. The real end of the loop is not the day you block them online or when they find someone new. It happens in the moment you no longer feel anything when you think of them. No joy, no sadness, no anger, no longing. Just a quiet ease. As if that story never truly had the power to bring you to your knees. In that moment, you haven't just prevailed over a person. You've prevailed over the unconscious part inside you. The part that once believed love had to hurt to be real, that loss was proof of value, that silence was punishment. Now you know silence is freedom. And then on a deeper level, you begin to feel gratitude, not because they hurt you, but because that very wound opened a doorway for your soul to mature. You no longer call them a narcissist, you call them a teacher of the dark. Because without them, you would never have discovered how powerful your light really is. The lesson ends when you understand this. You don't need to close the story. It has already closed itself the moment you stepped out of the role. The narcissist may still be writing the next chapters of the same old book, still looking for new people to perform with, but you, the awakened one, are holding a completely different book. In it, the words are no longer written in pain, but in awareness, compassion, and a freedom that cannot be possessed. And when you turn the last page of the old chapter, you don't say the end. You simply smile and whisper, "Thank you for teaching me that love is not a loop. It is the path out of unconsciousness, and I have chosen to walk out, to become myself." That is when the circle closes, and your soul, after spinning so many times in the maze of pain, finally steps out and stands in the light of awareness, where every lesson dissolves into peace. When the soul steps out of that maze, the first thing you feel is not happiness, but a strange stillness. No more climaxes, no more tears, no more emotional extremes that once made you addicted to suffering as if it were life itself. There is only a vast open space where your heart exhales in relief, and that is the sign of true freedom. Not loud joy, but a serenity so deep that at first you don't know what to do with it. You've been used to storms, so calm makes you suspicious. But slowly, you realize this is what your soul has always been seeking. Not someone to fill you, but your own inner fullness. You begin to look back at the journey as if watching a dream. Every stage, the intense love, the subtle manipulation, the arguments, the silence, the despair, the awakening, now appears as a perfect piece in the alchemical process of the soul. In alchemy, raw metal must pass through fire to become gold. And in inner life, the same is true. A person must go through the deepest pain to touch the purest light. The narcissist is that fire, cruel, fierce, but necessary. Without them, the gold in you would remain buried in the ore of the unconscious. You no longer crave a happy ending because you've come to understand that the only real ending is growth. They may still be repeating the same patterns with someone else, but you no longer care. Not because you are indifferent, but because you understand the law of the universe. Each person must take responsibility for their own soul's lesson. You cannot learn it for them, just as they cannot keep you in the dark once you are ready to walk into the light. During this time, you may feel a kind of emptiness, a space once filled with pain, now lying open. But don't be afraid. That emptiness is the sacred space in which your soul is reborn. In that stillness, you begin to hear your true voice. I don't need anyone to confirm that I am worthy of love. I always have been. That is the moment you realize that true forgiveness does not come from mere kindness, but from deep understanding. You don't forgive because they deserve it, but because you no longer want to carry their burden. Forgiveness doesn't erase what was done. It simply returns each person's energy to where it belongs. You no longer need to hold anger in your heart to prove that you were hurt. You only need to live well to prove that you have understood. When the soul reaches this level, something miraculous begins to happen. Your frequency changes. You no longer attract people who come from fear-based energy. You begin to attract kindred souls, people who don't need you to save them, only to be present. New relationships appear, gentle, quiet, without drama. In them you don't have to try to be loved, because you have become love in motion. And it is precisely when you stop searching that true love finds you. Not the kind of love that makes your heart race, but the kind that makes your spirit grow still. Someone will arrive not to complete you, but to walk beside you. Two free souls, side by side, without chains. They will see you not through the lens of admiration or possession, but with the sacred recognition. I see you. I know who you are. At this point, the expressions they have so carefully rehearsed no longer match reality. They still say the same lines, still try to maintain the image of being happy, winning, doing great, but the light has gone out in their eyes. The new person starts to feel that something is off, a tightness in the energy, a tension between words and emotions. The mask is still there, but cracks have appeared. You no longer ask, why did this happen to me? But what was this trying to teach me? And when the question changes, life changes. You begin to see the mysterious order of everything. That suffering is not punishment, but initiation. That meeting them was not a mistake, but an invitation to return to your highest self. One day when you look back, you will no longer see yourself as someone who survived a relationship with a narcissist, but as someone who has passed through the dark night of the soul, carrying a lit torch. You understand that every encounter is sacred, even the most painful ones, because the soul does not care about temporary happiness, it cares about evolution. And as you evolve, the entire energetic weight of the old story dissolves on its own. The memories that once hurt now become markers of growth. The lessons that once broke you now become the raw material of wisdom. You realize you never truly lost anyone. You only lost an old version of yourself, the one who needed approval, feared abandonment, and believed that love meant sacrifice. Now, you are no longer the wounded empath. You are the sovereign empath, the one who knows how to love and how to stop, how to give and how to keep, how to see the darkness without letting it consume you. You become a living symbol of wholeness, where love and boundaries are one. And as you walk forward, not in triumph, but in peace, your soul whispers, the lesson is complete, the loop is over. I don't need to repeat anything anymore. From that moment on, you are free. Not just free from them, but free from all your old patterns. You understand that real love does not make you lose yourself. It helps you find yourself. And so, the journey you once thought was a tragedy turns out to be only the beginning of your rebirth. You have not lost anything at all. You have simply become yourself in your most complete form.